In the depths of the Arabian desert, where the scorching sun meets endless dunes and silence speaks louder than words, there existed beings that walked among humans yet remained invisible to most eyes, creatures made of smokeless fire, possessing intelligence, free will, and the capacity to choose between right and wrong, just like us. These were the Jinn, mysterious entities mentioned throughout the Quran, living parallel lives in a world we cannot see, but one that intersects with ours in ways we rarely understand. Tonight, I want to share with you an extraordinary encounter that changed the fate of one such Jinn forever. A meeting so profound that it transformed not just one being, but opened the doors of guidance to an entire hidden civilization. This is the story of how a Jinn came face to face with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, heard the words of divine revelation, and made a choice that would echo through eternity. Imagine for a moment that you are a being of immense power, able to traverse vast distances in mere moments, capable of hearing whispers from far away, living for centuries, while generations of humans rise and fall like waves upon the shore. You have seen empires built and destroyed, witnessed the prayers of the righteous and the schemes of the wicked, yet something within you remains restless, searching for a truth you cannot name. This was the reality for a group of Jinn who lived during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In the early years of his mission, when the message of Islam was still taking root in the harsh soil of Mecca, the Quran itself tells us about this remarkable encounter in Surah al-Jinn, where Allah describes how a company of Jinn listened to the recitation of the Quran and immediately recognized its divine origin, saying to one another that they had heard an amazing recitation that guides to the right course, and so they believed in it and would never associate anyone with their Lord. But what led these Jinn to that momentous night, and what exactly transpired during their encounter with the Prophet that transformed their entire understanding of existence? To understand this, we must first recognize that Jinn, like humans, lived in a state of spiritual confusion before the final message of Islam. Some worshipped idols, others followed previous prophets, and many were misled by Iblis, the chief of the rebellious Jinn who refused to bow to Adam and became Satan. The Jinn had their own societies, their own customs, and their own spiritual struggles, and when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was chosen as the final messenger, his message was not for humans alone, but for all of creation endowed with consciousness and choice. According to authentic narrations, the Prophet was traveling with his companions to the marketplace of Ukaz when he stopped in a valley called Nakla to pray the night prayer. And it was during this prayer, as his blessed voice rose in the stillness of the night reciting the words of Allah, that a group of Jinn happened to pass by and heard something that stopped them in their tracks. Imagine the scene, the darkness of night enveloping the desert, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and the voice of the Prophet reciting verses of such beauty, power, and truth that even beings made of fire could not help but pause and listen with every fiber of their being. The Jinn were astonished because they had never heard anything like this before. Words that penetrated directly into the heart, that spoke to the deepest questions of existence, that explained the purpose of life, the nature of God, and the reality of what awaits us beyond death with such clarity and eloquence that doubt simply melted away. These Jinn listened intently, and when the Prophet finished his prayer, they hurried back to their people to warn them, saying that they had heard a Quran that guides to what is right, and they believed in it and would never associate partners with their Lord. This moment is crucial because it reveals something profound about the nature of truth. When genuine divine guidance is presented, sincere hearts recognize it immediately, regardless of whether those hearts belong to humans or Jinn, regardless of what falsehood they may have believed before. because truth has a light that darkness cannot hide, and a sound that resonates with the fitra. The natural disposition toward recognizing the Creator that Allah has placed within all conscious beings. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not even aware at first that the jinn were listening to him, but Allah informed him through revelation, and later. The Prophet would have more direct encounters with delegations of jinn who came to learn about Islam, to ask questions, to pledge their allegiance to the truth. Much like the human delegations that came from various tribes to embrace the new faith. In one particularly detailed narration, the Prophet's companion Abdullah ibn Mas'ud describes how the Prophet took him one night to the outskirts of Mecca and drew a circle around him, instructing him not to leave it. And then the Prophet went forward into the darkness where Abdullah could hear multiple voices engaged in intense discussion with the Prophet, though he could see no one else present. When the Prophet returned at dawn, Abdullah asked what had happened, and the Prophet explained that a delegation of jinn from the city of Nazibin had come to him, and he had recited the Quran to them and taught them about Islam, and they had accepted the faith and returned to their people as Muslim missionaries. Think about the implications of this for a moment. While the Prophet was facing persecution, mockery, and resistance from the powerful tribes of Mecca, while humans were rejecting the message and clinging to their idols and traditions, beings from an entirely different realm of existence were recognizing the truth, embracing it wholeheartedly, and returning to their communities to spread the light of Islam among their own kind. This tells us something beautiful about how Allah's mercy extends to all of creation, and how guidance is not limited by the barriers we perceive, but reaches every corner of existence where there are hearts ready to receive it. The jinn who accepted Islam faced their own challenges and struggles, because just as human society was divided between believers and disbelievers, so too was the world of the jinn. And these early Muslim jinn had to contend with opposition from their own people, from those who clung to old superstitions, from those who followed Iblis in his rebellion, and from those who profited from keeping others in ignorance and misguidance. Yet they persevered, and Islamic scholarship tells us that jinn continued to come to the Prophet throughout his life, learning from him, seeking his guidance, and even seeking his arbitration in disputes among themselves, just as the human companions did. What's particularly moving about this story is that it reminds us that the hunger for truth, the longing for purpose, and the deep need to connect with our Creator transcends all boundaries of form, origin, or nature. Whether we are made of clay or fire, whether we live 70 years or 700, whether we are visible or invisible, we all share that fundamental spiritual yearning that only submission to the one true God can satisfy. The jinn who met the Prophet and accepted Islam were not coerced, they were not bribed, they were not even sought out initially. They simply heard the truth, recognized it for what it was, and made the choice that every soul will ultimately be judged upon: to accept or reject, to submit or rebel, to follow the light or remain in darkness. And here's something that should make us reflect deeply on our own choices and priorities. These jinn, despite their powers and their long lives, despite being able to see and experience things we cannot, still needed the same guidance that we need, still had to humble themselves before the same truth, still had to make the same fundamental decision between faith and disbelief. They had no advantage over us in the sight of Allah except through their deeds, just as we have no advantage over them except through our deeds, because Allah judges all beings by their hearts, their intentions and their action, not by their nature or abilities. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, showed kindness and patience in teaching these jinn, just as he did with humans, explaining the pillars of faith, the requirements of Islam, the importance of prayer and remembrance, the need to abandon false gods and dedicate worship to Allah alone. He did not dismiss them or consider them less important than his human followers. Rather, he recognized that his message was universal, that his prophethood extended to all thinking, choosing beings, and he fulfilled his responsibility toward them with the same care and dedication. This challenges us to think about how we view those who are different from us, how we approach sharing knowledge and guidance, how we treat those who come seeking truth from backgrounds or circumstances we might not understand. If the prophet could teach with patience and wisdom to beings he could not even see, made of a substance alien to his own nature, how much more should we be willing to reach out with compassion and clarity to our fellow humans who share so much more in common with us? As we conclude this remarkable story, let us remember that the world is far more complex and mysterious than we often acknowledge. That realms exist beyond our perception, filled with beings making the same choices we make every day. And that the message of Islam is truly universal in a way that encompasses not just different nations and tribes of humanity, but different species of conscious creation. The jinn who accepted Islam after meeting the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, remind us that truth is recognizable to anyone who approaches it with an open heart and sincere intention. That guidance comes to those who seek it regardless of what obstacles might seem to stand in the way, and that the moment we hear divine revelation, we are faced with the same choice those jinn faced in that desert valley so many centuries ago. Will we listen, reflect, and submit? Or will we turn away and miss the opportunity for eternal success? This is not just their story. It is a mirror held up to our own souls, asking us what we will do when confronted with truth, how we will respond when guidance reaches us, and whether we will have the courage and humility to change our lives completely for the sake of pleasing our Creator. Just as those remarkable jinn did when they heard the Quran recited in the stillness of that Arabian night and recognized, in words they had never heard before, the answer to every question their hearts had ever asked. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the unseen world around us, or if it reminded you of the universal power of divine truth, do me a favor, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible untold stories from Islamic history.